a little after 12 now, unless we want to wait another couple minutes. It's up to you, Manda.
No, we can get going. I think that's fine. Yeah. So, well, welcome, everyone. I can't really see any of you, so it's kind of weird. I'm glad, actually, that you can jump in with a question and interrupt me, because then I don't feel like I'm just talking to the void out there. But I'm going to just go through a few basic slides on resumes, and then we really wanted to give all of you the opportunity to ask questions, especially if you have specific questions about kind of your experiences and how to translate them into a resume. And just to give credit where credit is due, some of this information is stuff I developed, but some of it is information that we got from the UNC Charlotte and the CSU Career Centers, which are great resources to go to. And I'm just waiting for my slide to advance. There we go. Okay. So kind of the basics when you think of a resume, like what you're actually trying to do is it's really how you're marketing yourself to somebody. So it's a single document that's going to showcase your education, your experiences, and your skills as they relate to any sort of job or internship that you might trying to get. So kind of there's like three basic parts to it, and one of them is actually kind of optional, but we'll talk more about that in detail. But the first thing is, on every resume, you're going to have a header at the top, which is top and center, which has your name and your contact information so that they know how to reach you. One thing that's really important there is to make sure that once you start sending resumes somewhere, that you are regularly checking whatever email you put at the top. Potential employers are going to either call you on the phone or they're going to email you. So don't, those random phone numbers that you might normally let go to voicemail, you want to be sure, even if you let it go to voicemail, that you're checking the voicemail regularly, or you might want to think about picking those numbers up occasionally when you don't recognize them if you've got a resume out there, because it might be a potential employer or someone to offer you an internship. The next thing that you're going to have is what would be called either an objective or a profile statement. They're two different things, and we'll talk more in detail about those, but they kind of help set the stage for the rest of your resume. And then after that, you're going to have kind of a listing of your skills and experience, and there's different categories that you're going to put those in, but it's really going to give a snapshot of the really important things that you have to offer to anywhere you might be going. A couple of the basic rules on formatting. With most resumes, you want to use normal fonts. So sometimes people think I want to make my resume stand out, and they'll try and use a really fancy font, but that can sometimes make it harder for people to read it. So stick with kind of the basic yet somewhat boring fonts of things like Times and Arial and Courier. And generally you want the text to be 10 to 12 point font, although your header you can do a little bit bigger, make sure your name's big at the top. You also don't want your margins to go over an inch in size, and you want to use throughout the resume kind of consistent font and spacing. So you don't want to switch the font in the middle. You want any spacing have to be fairly uniform. And you're generally aiming for one page. So you want everything that's on there to be really kind of wow factor and important information, because you only have a page to fit it in. So an example of what different headers might look like. So even though I was saying, use kind of boring fonts and stuff, there's still a little bit that you can, change it up to make it look like yours is a little unique and different. Here's just kind of 4 examples. Wanted to point out that the email you put on there, if you put something other than your student email, which you might want to do, especially when you later on are getting close to graduating, you might want to have not your student email because you won't be a student forever. Make sure that whatever email address it is, that it sounds professional. Generally your name is the best, but you don't want to have something like surfergirl273@hotmail as on your resume. And you also want to make sure that for whatever phone number you put, double check whatever your voicemail message is, your outgoing voicemail message. So if they're leaving a message, make sure that when they reach you, even though they're leaving a message, that it's a professional sounding message on your voicemail. So the next thing after the header that you would have is either an objective or a profile statement. So this is right under your contact information, and in the statement you don't want to use first person, so you want to avoid using I. But it's going to give, you're going to basically try and concentrate in like 1 or 2 sentences the knowledge, skills, and experience that you provide to an employer. And kind of the difference between whether you use an objective statement or a profile statement is objective statement is when you know exactly what type of job you want. So you're putting language in there so that when they look at it, they realize that this person is looking for exactly the kind of job that we have to offer. So like an example I gave you is you might say, you know, your objective statement could be a desire that you desire a position as a research intern in the geosciences that includes the opportunity to conduct field work. So they know you're looking for an intern type level position, they know what field, and they know that one of the things you want to do in it is get to conduct field work. So that's an example of an objective statement that you kind of know exactly what you want. Other resumes use what's called a profile statement, and it can be very similar to an objective statement, but it goes into a little bit more depth about knowledge and skills and is not as specific about what kind of opportunity you're looking for. This can be really useful at times when you're sending your resume somewhere where there's multiple opportunities. So it allows you to seem kind of open to multiple things and you're really getting across your skills. I know like at UNC Charlotte, the Career Center has this thing called Hire a 49er, where businesses are looking specifically to hire alumni or current students of UNC Charlotte. And so the Career Center has a certain format that if your resume's in, they'll put it in this database, and employers are just randomly searching through that. So in that case, that's why a profile statement might be better, because you don't even know what kind of opportunities are out there. So you want to more highlight what your unique skills are, so that when people are looking through all of these resumes that are there, the first couple sentences stand out to them as someone they might be looking for. So an example of what a profile statement might be is, you know, athlete with strong team leadership skills, ability to multitask and self-motivation, excellent customer service skills with 3+ years of direct experience. So it's very short and succinct, but it tells quite quickly what kind of a person they're going to expect to see as they look through the rest of the resume. So then after the objective or profile statement, there's generally different categories that you kind of put all of your skills and experiences into. So one of them that's pretty uniform across all resumes is you're going to put your education, where you're going to put where you went to school, what years you've been there, what your major was. You might choose to put what your GPA is. And then there's a lot of other categories that you can have. And I listed a whole bunch, and you don't have to have all of these. What you have to figure out is kind of what do my experiences and skills best fit under categorically, and just pick, you know, maybe 2 to 5 of these categories to really highlight. So you might put things like your work experience. You might want to put relevant coursework. Skills might be things like you know, computer skills, different programs and software that you know how to use. You might want to put your volunteer experience, or if you've done internships, if you have campus activities or leadership positions, accomplishments you've received, or awards you've gotten. You also could potentially list references with the names and contact information of people willing to provide a reference for you. If you're going to put a reference section, make sure you put people. Sometimes people put references and then they say available upon request. Well, that's kind of obvious. You don't really need to waste space on your resume to say that. But if you are going to list references, which isn't a required thing unless it says so in the job ad, make sure that you've talked to those people first and that they know that you're listing them as a potential reference on your resume, so that they're not kind of blindsided if somebody reaches out to them. But you really want to, from these different categories, these are just examples, you want to find the categories that are going to best fit your skill set and really showcase you and what abilities you have. Then within those categories, you're going to want to kind of bullet your information. And you're going to want to do this because nobody wants, if you start having long paragraphs, nobody's going to read those very quickly, and people like to scan resumes, so you want things that are going to be bulleted so they can quickly see the information. And kind of a recipe for how you make an effective bullet is to start with what's considered a strong action verb. So you want to start the bullet with something that you do that's a verb, Then you want to, describe the skill used or the task completed, and you want to also include the result or value added. And I'll give you some examples of those, but before we get into like the full bullet, I just wanted to show you, here's some examples of what action verbs might be and what different areas you might want to use them for. So, if in terms of like research, you might want to start a sentence saying that you assessed something, or you analyzed something, or you documented something, or you examined it. So they know you've got a verb there, and then you would go on to kind of describe it more. So when you put these together with the the strong action verb with then some sort of description of the skill and the task, oftentimes, especially if you're applying for a specific job and it's the first time you're doing your resume, what you might want to do is look through the job ad and underline in the job ad some of the skills that they're looking for, and use some of that same language. So make sure that the things they're looking for, that you have them in your resume, and they don't have to be exactly the same. So an example that I just kind of made up here, you might see a job ad that says, this position will coordinate with project partners in the government and private sectors. So coordinate is what they're really looking for, somebody who can coordinate. And it doesn't necessarily matter if you haven't worked with government and private sectors, if you can provide an example of some other aspect in which you've coordinated. So on your resume, you might say, well, I've coordinated volunteers for a 5K fun run. You're demonstrating then that the skill set that they're looking for you have. And an even better way to do it, getting at this idea of giving what the result or value added was, and being kind of quantitative about the task that you completed. You can imagine if you read a resume and it said coordinated over 25 volunteers for a 5K fun run, resulting in an efficiently run event. Just adding that little bit that it was an efficiently run event makes that person sound like, oh, they really added value to what they were doing when they were using that skill of coordination. And since we'll make these slides available to you in some form, I just want to point out a bunch of websites here that go through long lists of kind of action verbs or good words to use in resumes. So just kind of giving you, when you're not sure what words to use, sometimes just looking through a list and then you're like, ooh, I like that word and I know what context I can use that in. So here's kind of another example of how you might bullet things. This is taken from the CSU Career Center, and this is an example from one of the resumes that they provided. You can see that as you look at the stuff that's listed here, they've taken the time to underline some keywords. Sometimes people do that in their resume, but if you do it, you want to do it really sparingly, because everything you've got in your resume should be really important words. So, but notice that they get quantitative on things. They'll say that they had the highest sales for 4 consecutive months. They organized this event, and then they tell you exactly how much donations they raised. So anytime you can be quantitative. So, like, look at the last one. It says, created over 23 different marketing pieces to promote programming, membership specials, and services. So you could have just as easily said created marketing pieces, but it makes it sound stronger when you can quantify how much it is. So pick and choose the opportunities that you have in your experience to add numbers of things so that people can see it's not something that you did just one time, but that it was a substantial contribution. Here's a couple overall resume don'ts, and some of these are probably pretty obvious, but they're always good when you're kind of looking through your resume to double check. So the first most important one is poor spelling and grammar. And just, this is not a unique problem to people that are earlier in their career. I've seen job ads from people with PhDs, or job applications from people with PhDs that have been working for 20 years, and they still have typos. But generally, when you're looking through it, typos and poor spelling and grammar make people think that you don't care about the quality of your work, and so that can be viewed very negatively. So make sure you get the spelling and grammar correct. Don't overstate your experience. So while you want to talk positively about the things you did, and sometimes you'll need help from other people to really put it in the best light, don't exaggerate what you've done, because while that might help your resume get noticed, it'll actually hurt you in an interview, because face to face, they can usually tell when somebody has exaggerated what their experience actually is. So you want to use strong language and show confidence, but you don't want to exaggerate or overstate what your experience is. You also want to be careful about providing too much information. This is why it's really good to use bullets and think about your words carefully and succinctly, and kind of use that formula I gave you, because if you start to put a long description where it's like a paragraph narrative, readers that are looking through these get bored and they stop reading them. And then kind of the last thing is to avoid being too generic. So it kind of gives an example here. If there's a high-volume restaurant, saying that you have customer service experience won't look as good on the resume as saying that you have managed the rush after home game. So giving, more detail so they can really see kind of what your skill set is. So this is just kind of talking about some of the common concerns I've heard before from students that I just want to talk through with you. I used to hear this all the time from some of my former students, that I don't have any relevant experience. So they'd be looking for a job in research and they thought, well, I don't have any experience. But what you really want to focus on is skills that you've gotten in your other jobs, or in volunteer, or being a part of clubs, or being in classrooms that are transferable. So kind of an example I always think of is, I had this undergrad at one point and he told me he didn't have any relevant experience. And so I started asking him, like, well, have you ever had a job? Oh yeah, I've had, jobs for forever, but I've always worked in restaurants. Well, as I started asking him more questions, he had worked his way up from being a busboy to not only being a server, but being the lead server that would train new servers in the restaurant. So we reworked his resume to kind of highlight that he has experience training other staff on processes and procedures. And I tried to explain to him, in a lab situation in science where you might have to be doing the same procedure over and over, the ability that you have to train somebody else to do something like that is actually very valuable. And so even though you got it in a restaurant, it's still a very valuable experience. You got to figure out how to kind of emphasize those things on your resume. So if you think I don't have any relevant experience, you just got to talk to your mentors, because I guarantee you all have some relevant experience. You just got to figure out how to put it in the right framework. Also, keep in mind that you guys all have from Progress what Strength Finders told you were your strengths, and there's lots of probably good language if you still have that description of who you are, if you thought it was really appropriate to you, especially the stuff you highlighted. And think about ways that you can maybe integrate some of that into your resume in terms of the things that you're really good at. I also hear a lot that I don't know what to put in an objective statement, and that's fine. This is the one part of the resume that's really kind of some people really, really like it, and some people just feel awkward writing it. And if it feels awkward, it's not going to come across as genuine. So if you don't have something to put there, it's okay to not have an objective statement. The other thing that sometimes students worry about is they think that, my GPA is not that great. Do I have to list it? Because they don't want to list something that they think will make them look, that'll be looked negatively at. And generally, the rule of thumb is if your GPA is over a 3.0, you should probably list it, because it'll help you. But it's not required unless they say so in the job ad. So if you just put, this is the university, this is the years I've attended there, this is my major, that's sufficient for a resume. So there's no need to draw attention to kind of your flaws or your weaknesses in a resume. So kind of some of the few kind of like finishing touches of things. Like I said, you want to look for the typos and grammar errors, so it's generally good to get a couple people to read through it. I do this all the time when I'm updating my resume. Read it out loud to yourself. It's surprising when you read it out loud that sometimes you catch those awkward statements, and you can help make sure it kind of sounds like the way you would speak. The other thing is the average resume takes about 4 to 5 drafts before it really gets at the place it needs to be. be. So that's one reason to, even if you don't have something to apply for yet, to just start working on the resume and starting to kind of iterate on it, it can be useful. You also don't need to change the content of your resume for every job that you apply for. So you don't have to write a new resume every time you apply for a job. In fact, oftentimes you'll include a cover letter that I'll talk about in a little bit, and that will change from job to job, but you can generally use the same resume. Although what you might want to do is reorder certain things in your resume. So you might want to move one section a little higher up on the page just because it's more relevant to that particular job. But you want to kind of keep all the same stuff, because even though job ads have certain skills that they might list, you never know what other additional skill that they didn't list might be the thing that really, when they see it, they go, oh, that's fabulous, we need that too. So you want to make sure that you're always using the same kind of general skills or what you're presenting, and so that's why you don't have to change it every time. We also suggest that you visit your campus career center. There's great resources there for people to look over your resume. And kind of another kind of finishing touch when you're getting ready to send a resume out, make sure that you review your social media and what potential employers might find out about you just from searching Google, doing a Google search of you, or searching Facebook or Instagram. I actually have, just about a month ago, I was at a conference and I was talking with a couple of people who work in the private sector, and I've known them for several years, and one of them is a former intern of the other. And somehow we got on the topic of talking about jobs, and John still gives Adam a hard time, because when Adam was interning with them, he told Adam, check your social media, and Adam said, oh, I got nothing on it. So then John, of course, had to go and check and make sure if Adam was really telling the truth, and he found out that Adam was following Kim Kardashian on Facebook, or had liked a bunch of stuff of hers. And clearly that wasn't a deal breaker, and they've always had a good relationship, but he gives him a hard time about that, because he's like, if I didn't already know you, the one thing I was able to find out about you was that you really liked Kim Kardashian. And so you just want to think about, when people find your social media, is that really the face that you kind of want to put out? Because I do know from talking to several employers, especially in the private sector, a lot of them, before they'll invite someone in for an interview, they'll look at their social media. And then one last thing related to the resume, which is kind of something about the modern age. A lot of places now will ask you to submit an electronic resume, and sometimes that's just simply uploading a PDF, but other times they'll have a box that you actually have to cut and paste into. You might want to consider having two versions of your resume, the same information, but have one that's formatted in the way you would want it if you were printing it out or if you were emailing a PDF, and then have another that's simply text and just has spaces in between the sections, because that way when you cut and paste that into a text window, it doesn't get all weird and funky with formatting if it's already kind of set up to just be a text version. So here's an example. This came from the UNC Charlotte Career Center. They have several examples that you can find online there of what a student resume might look like. So you can see that they've chosen to put related skills and instrumentation, their education, their related experiences, which are kind of either jobs or volunteering, their professional activities. But one thing to note is where they have their related experience, notice that they're listed with the most recent at the top, and then they go to the ones that were farther in the past. So the top one, even though they've started it in 1998, it goes to present. So they're currently doing that, where the others were time periods in the past. So you kind of always want to list it with the most recent, generally at the top. And so if you're worried that, well, my most recent job isn't as relevant as my older job, you can also think about breaking it into relevant work experience and put that first and put the really relevant job, and then have a separate category that says other work experience, where you logically list the others. So there's ways you can work it to make sure the most relevant things are kind of at the top, but still generally follow this kind of chronological order. And then kind of the last thing I just want to mention, even though this is really about talking about resumes, something that goes often with a resume is a cover letter. And really the purpose of a cover letter is to provide context to your resume to help the person who's going to be evaluating it really know how all of those skills you have fit together. So it is the place where you can provide a little narrative and try and connect the dots for them so that they can really see how the various experiences you have, when you combine them, really make you the right fit for the job. You can really think of the cover letter as, it's the way that you're adding value to them. And in a cover letter, what you really want to emphasize is why you're going to be valuable to them. You don't want to highlight all the reasons you need an internship and how it would benefit you, because ultimately they want to know how they're going to benefit from having you as an intern. So you really want to highlight what you can do for them as opposed to what they would do for you. And kind of the 4 basic parts of a cover letter is, meet and you want to say dear whoever it's to, but then you want to, tell them how you found out about this opportunity. And kind of, you might say, I'm a student at such and such university, so they kind of know a little who you are. You kind of summarize really quickly your skills and experience, and then you want to immediately turn that to how those will bring value to their company, how you see that fitting in. You want to kind of research the company, or if it's a research lab, so that you show that you know something about them and you see how your skills fit in and that you've kind of done your research on who they are. And then at the end, you just thank them for their time in reading through your materials and show enthusiasm to communicate with them more in the future about this opportunity. So that's kind of the last slide. So I'm going to, well, I guess first, are there any questions? If there's not any questions, what I can do is turn it over to Alana.
We're good. Yeah, but then like yeah, like
So, hi everyone. Hang on a second. I'm going to mute everybody's microphone because we're getting a lot of background noise. And what you can do is just click that you have a question or raise your hand, and we can unmute you to ask your question. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change back to me, and I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Can everyone see that now? And then what we're going to do is Anna is, this is Anna Hodshire, and she's in the CSU Atmospheric Science Department here, right down the hallway from my office. So I asked her, Emily and I asked her if she wouldn't mind sharing a bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly about resumes and CVs, and a little bit about her particular resume. So take it away, Anna.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me show up for this. So I know we just talked a lot about resumes, and now I'm going to throw a CV at you, but don't worry, CV is pretty similar to a resume. It just allows you to be a little longer and go more in depth. Often CVs will be about 2 to 3 pages long, and they're particularly nice for if you're applying for like a science or engineering type position, because you can really highlight all the research experience you've had, plus any presentations or papers you've written, which are things that you might not necessarily want to list out in full detail on a resume because you're trying to keep things shorter and just highlight the skills you have. So the reason why this is titled The Good and the Bad/Ugly is because I'm going to show you 2 different CVs. One was the one I used when I was applying for grad schools, and I'd actually lost track of it, and I asked my advisor if he still had a copy around, and he said yes, and he sent it to me, and then he told me it was ugly. So, but I got into grad school, so I think an important lesson to take away is that your CV or resume does not have to be beautiful for employees to still see that you are an awesome person, you have value, and that you'd be great with their company or, research lab or whatever it is you're trying out for. And then the so-called good one is the CV that I've updated for now, and it's slightly more attractive.
I can't see the screen right now. So,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I didn't know if the other people online were having that same problem.
I have not shown anything interesting yet, so it's okay.
I can see just the title page.
Yes, that's all we're showing right now.
Okay.
Okay, so Amanda, maybe...
It says waiting to view screen at the top of my thing. So, but it's fine as long as everyone else online can see it, then I'm not worried.
Okay, well, if Ashley, Katie, or Samantha, if you can't see it, just raise your hand if you cannot see the screen. So CV examples, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We have no hand raises, so I think we will move ahead, and if I see a hand raised, we will regroup. Okay, so, all right, so slide 2.
Okay, so I don't know how well you're actually going to be able to see this since it's kind of all shoved in, but what we're looking at is the first page. Oh, go ahead. Okay, the first page of the CV that I submitted for my grad school applications, and as you can see, it's just really basic. There's no actual formatting, which is great if you're handing in a resume, but sometimes because CVs are longer, it is nice to have a little bit of formatting so your prospective employer can quickly find the sections that they're particularly interested in. But so I've listed my education at the top, and then next I listed my work experience, and it is all in chronological order, like Manda mentioned. And then below that, I get into my research experience. So I just listed all of the different things. I was a physics and applied math undergraduate, so I listed the different things that I had done with that. And then, let's see, how do I go to the next? Okay, and then this is the second page of my resume. So it was about, or CV, it was about a page and a half in total length. So I listed my service projects, and then I added a little bit of just personal information about myself at the bottom, just kind of my interests. And I added that in because oh, it's so big now. I added in the personal parts because for this particular application, I didn't really have an opportunity for like a cover letter or anything that wasn't asked for, so I wanted to highlight a little bit about myself. And it turns out that was a really great idea because my advisor had been in a band in undergraduate, and he loved playing music, and he read that I played all these instruments in these bands. And so that's actually one of the things that made like my application stand out to him and make him think that, hey, this sounds like an interesting person who has not only the relevant skills to be in my research group, but also sounds like she just has a good life and has different interests. So let's bring her in. So that's one thing that, especially if you do have the opportunity to present either kind of like the cover letter or the CV, it's nice to add just a tiny little bit about like what you like to do outside of the specific skill set that the employer is looking for, because most people don't want a robot working for them. They want someone who has personality and gets out and does things. So that's my original CV, and then this is the updated one. So now you can see I've added in a little bit of formatting, so it's really easy to find the different sections, so like my education and then work experience. And then, so now that I've been in grad school for about 3 years, I've managed to kind of flesh out my CV for more research experience. So I've kind of listed my projects that I'm working on right now at CSU. And then this next page, is a continuation of, doesn't matter, continuation of the work I've done. So now I have a publication, so I managed to add in that. I've attended several presentations that, the reason why under the presentations, like if my name is bold and first, that meant that I gave the presentation. And then you'll see near the bottom, there's a presentation that I'm not the first person listed, so someone else gave that presentation, but I'm still a co-author for the presentation, so I was allowed to add that. So that's something that's really nice about CVs. You get to just really show all the things you've done. And then, So it continues on for another, I'm really bad at using the laptop, another, about another quarter page, and once again I just highlight my service that I've done and my personal interests, which I've kind of tailored to be more of, instead of just kind of, they were slightly generic bullet points on my old CV, and now they're a little more specific on what I like to do personally. So those are my two examples of my CVs, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Do we have any questions? Should we unmute everyone again and just open forum here? Oh, we have a question from Ashley. Okay, Ashley, you're unmuted. Go for it.
So I guess this is more towards resumes, but I'm an older student, so I have a lot more work experience. But I've been at my jobs for a long amount of time, and I always feel like my resume looks kind of sad because I only have 2 jobs on it, but I've been at them, one for 8 years and one for 3 years. So, I mean, how does that look to people?
You know what? I don't think it matters that that you only have 2 jobs. I think you just want to think about highlighting what skills you have from them, and that's the more important thing. I mean, some places, sometimes they look and it's like, oh, this person moves jobs every 2 years. Are they ever going to stay somewhere? So it can go either way. You know, so sometimes having more isn't even better. So I think what you always want to think about is whatever your experience is what it is. So you just want to think of ways that you can highlight the strong parts of it, and not worry about the things you can't control. You can't control that you've only had those 2 jobs over the last couple years.
Thank you.
So from my perspective also, I would say that if you had just the 2 work experience titles, you know, with the dates that you worked there, maybe under the one where you worked 8 years, you would have maybe the most bullet points of action items and situations and then results from those action items, right? So, like, let's say that you eventually became a manager of something, or you eventually led a particular part of a project. You would really want to emphasize that in your bullet points, and that shows that you not only worked there for 8 years, but you also grew while you were there.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more? We have a question from Katie. Go for it, Katie.
Hi, so sorry, there's a little bit of background noise, but my question is, when does high school experience become irrelevant? When should I keep mentioning awards that I earned in high school through in my resume, or do I stop it kind of now that college has started? And that's my question.
So that's a really good question, and there's no right or wrong answer. I mean, at some point, yeah, you're going to start to lose some of that stuff, but I will tell you, I still have one thing from high school that still stays on my CV and resume, and it's been like 20-some years, and that's that I had a Girl Scout Gold Award, which in Girl Scouts is like the equivalent of, you know, a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout. And so I've always put that, and I probably always will, because I know that the guys do it with Eagle Scout. And so, you know, there's some things you can leave for a while. In general, though, like if you start thinking about like scholarships and stuff, I think it's fine when you're in your first year or 2 of undergrad, but once you start to get to like your junior and senior years, you probably want to start taking off those things that are from high school. But there's no right or wrong answer. You know what ultimately happens generally? People who are on the right track, you get to a point where you're like, I'm running out of space. I'm trying to keep this compact and I'm running out of space. And you're like, well, you know, I'm going to take this thing off because it's kind of old and it's not that relevant anymore.
Do we have any other questions? Those are great questions. Thank you for asking those questions. Really good stuff. I'm not sure if we covered this, Manda, but did we cover what the difference between a CV and a resume is? And maybe you want to just comment?
Yeah, I can comment. I didn't really go into detail because I figured for most of the people in progress, if you're in your early years, it doesn't really matter. So the difference is, you know, a resume is generally only one page, like 2 pages at most, where a CV, it's short for curriculum vitae, and it's used more in academic positions, and there's not generally a restriction on length. And so what happens is the CVs over time start to get ridiculously long. Like you'll even have academics talk about their short CV versus their long CV. And one of the main differences is you will start listing all of your publications on your CV. And you can imagine somebody who's had a career for 30 years, you know, they might have, you know, 80 publications or something like that over the course of their career. And so it gets quite lengthy. And, you know, there'll be, like, especially when you start presenting at conferences, people often put, you know, conference presentations on their CV. And so there's a little bit more, it's geared towards academia, and there isn't as much restrictions on length, and then there's a little bit more emphasis on things like publications and presentations and that sort of thing. But a lot of times you can use them interchangeably, especially when you're early in your career, because you're not going to have peer-reviewed publications necessarily, so it doesn't really matter, because even if you were calling it a CV versus a resume, it's not going to be that different what's actually on it.
And one other thing that we have a question actually, and I'll come back to that later. But we have a question from Katie, and you're unmuted. Go ahead.
So I guess my question is that I look at like the resume and the CV, and it looks so pretty, and I just don't know when to underline or indent or bold or bullet point or italicize. Like, how do I know when to do that? Like, what words, when to format it? I know that if I went to like a career service and they helped me with it, that's good, but like, how do I know how to do it on my own? And that's the end of the question.
I think it's something personalized. It's definitely the main thing is just consistent. So, for instance, like impacting, I made all my major sections, personal interest. For this page, they're looking at personal interest and service in one specific font, and then, you know, my next thing would be if I was a mentor, that would be just underlined, and then, so yeah, just as long as you keep it consistent, that's important. But, you know, feel free to just sort of make your own format as long as it looks nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of personal preference on that. Like, so when you, at some point when you get to a CV versus a resume, like when people get to their publications, because there might be multiple authors, what people will start doing is they will, you know, bold their name in the list of authors or underline it so people can see where they actually are in it. I think on like a regular resume, when you're describing your skills, what you might want to think about, if you want to, like, if you're thinking, God, I'd really like to, you know, either italicize or bold or underline something, you want to think about in each bullet, what is the most important word, right? And so that's really the thing you want to draw emphasis to. And if it's like, oh, there's all these different words that are important, well, then if you can't really decide, then it's probably not a good use of that emphasis. So really think about, like, what is, in situations where like there's one word in this bullet that's so important, and maybe it's because it's a word that matches something that was in the job description of the job you're applying for. You know, they're looking for somebody who has, you know, communication skills, or like you might then, you know, if you're talking about some time where you know, you presented at such and such and articulated well, like, then you might want to think about emphasizing some of the words there, or like in that example I gave where they're looking for someone who can coordinate, like you might want to emphasize that word then, because you know it's one of the things that they're going to be looking for, so you're just kind of helping them out. Like you're almost like putting it to them on a silver platter, like here's that little, you know, word. But the things like indenting and spacing and all of that is really just what looks right to you. And some people are better than that than others, and so that's why career centers are great, or just if you have a friend who always makes stuff look pretty, have them look at it.
Yeah, I got my format from someone who actually had written a CV, and she's my office mate years ahead of me, and so she let me look at hers, and so I just used her formatting ideas.
And you know, that brings up another really great idea. You can, you know, some of the career centers will have examples, but you can also just Google for example resumes. And obviously you don't want to start plagiarizing somebody's resume by taking like the exact language they use and stuff like that. But in terms of format, look at ones and just find ones that you're like, oh, I kind of like how this looks. Like this just appeals to me. And then try and duplicate that kind of format and how they indent things and stuff like that.
And all the resources that are in Manda's presentation and that we're going to send to you, your career centers, even at your own institutions, and certainly here through CSU, have many examples of how you could format your resume. So don't worry about it too much. I mean, style comes with experience and personality, and just as you do it. But you can certainly always look at examples online. I even just Googled a couple of times, like formats for resumes or cover letters and CVs, and you'd be surprised how much stuff will pop up. Do we have any more questions? These are great questions. Keep them coming. Great, Katie. All right, you're on. Go.
Hi. So so I guess what I've seen is that certain jobs will say resume or CV or just resume or only CV. So how do you know if it doesn't specify or it mentions both? Which one do you choose? Is there a better one over the other? Do they want a resume over a CV, or would they rather have a CV over a resume if you had to choose?
So if they say either, I would give them the CV because it generally has a little bit more, but that little bit more is generally, which over time becomes a lot more, is things like publications and presentations and stuff that, early in your career you don't have many of those anyway. So it doesn't make as much of a difference. But oftentimes they say resume or CV because they don't actually care. They just want to know what your experience is. And so they're just trying to cast a broad net. So they say either because they just want to get something in that will be useful to them.
One other tool and tip that I learned recently, especially in this computer information age now, is that there are like places like LinkedIn. You may have heard of LinkedIn as like these social media sites for scientists and career professionals. And so one of the things that's really cool about LinkedIn is you could add your LinkedIn URL to, say, your header on your resume, and that way any employer could go to your LinkedIn profile where you could put up a lot more detail about some of the experiences and skills that you have. And so that's another useful resource that a lot of corporations are looking for nowadays, is this LinkedIn profile for potential employees. And that's a great way that you could provide a really short paper version of your resume or PDF of your resume, and then use your LinkedIn to really beef it up with a lot of detail. Do we have any more questions? All right, Katie, and go.
Sorry, I just have so many questions. Is it always, no matter what job you're applying for, is it always good to mention a language, or is that just kind of unnecessary?
If you've got one, mention it.
Yeah, if you have one that you're, really fluent in or very strongly skilled in, it's always good to mention it.
Okay, so if I was on the verge of not having enough room or something, would that, like, if it was like high school experience over a language, would language trump like something in high school if it was really important, or vice versa, or?
It probably depends on the job, but I would think, most languages, I guess it depends also what language, right? Like I took German in high school and college, which, I mean, I don't really retain much of it now, but there's very few places where it would be useful. So with that case, I would probably, go with some other skills but if you speak Spanish, and there's so many places where that's really relevant now, that might, make more sense. But once again, if it's like, some really not as common language, you might not emphasize that. So it's hard to say without knowing the details of what other things you might be pulling off instead. But if you speak Spanish well, I think it's always good, and that's a very easy thing to work in, right? So you can think about ways that maybe you move it around, because maybe it's just in a list of, you could have a thing that says other skills, where you just kind of list really briefly, MS, that you know how to use Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and fluent in Spanish. Like there's ways you can figure out to kind of put it in as a small little thing if you're worried about space, but make sure it's still there.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
There's always ways to make space for something small like that too. You can always play with your font sizes, your formatting. You can change your margins and things like that. Unless you're uploading it to like a copy-paste of a text file into some resume system, right? Then you may be space limited to some characters, but there's always a way on a sheet of paper to make enough space for that extra line, that extra little tidbit. You just got to play with it.
Okay.
Any more questions? These are great. If we don't have any more questions, it looks like we're just before the top of the hour here, so you're always welcome to email anybody on the Progress Leadership team if you have any more questions. You can always post questions on Facebook so that your peers can see them too. And yeah, there's lots of great ways to go about it. You can always just email me or Emily. Manda's email address is available as well on many of our communications, so feel free to just let us know if you have any more questions. We'll also be sending out a copy of this presentation so that you'll have all this information at your fingertips as well.
I'm going to just make one final comment, Alana. The fastest way to make your resume better is to share it with people and get their feedback. And I know it's a hard thing to do, because I mean, at least for me it always is, because I think people are going to judge me for it, because that's what you feel like you're using, them where people are going to, critique you and judge you. But, people that you trust, share it with them, because they'll think of different ways of doing it, and generally the more people that look and give you feedback, the stronger it's going to be. So as hard as it is sometimes, try and get past feeling like they're going to criticize you for it, or that they're going to judge you that you haven't done enough. Like, you just want to give it to people that want you to succeed, and the more eyes that kind of see it and give you feedback, even if it's just among your friends or a professor you trust, it's going to get better and stronger.
Good deal. Well, Katie, who's in person here, brought her resume, so we want to make sure that we get her a chance to look over her resume from Anna and myself. So if there aren't any more questions, like I said, we'll be sending out these materials afterwards for everyone. So, and you're always welcome to email or put your questions on Facebook. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.